The deeper you awaken, the lonelier it seems to become. But here lies the paradox. You are not moving away from others, you are simply moving closer to truth. And truth often walks alone. We live in a world addicted to noise, constant talking, scrolling, performing. Every moment must be filled with something. And so, silence feels like death, solitude feels like failure, and stillness feels like being left behind. Yet beneath that restless search for connection lies the quiet fear that we've never truly met ourselves. Awakening doesn't begin with light, it begins with emptiness. One day, the mask slips, the one you've worn for years without noticing. The laughter you used to offer on command no longer rises. The crowd that once comforted you now feels strangely far away. You begin to see that belonging has often meant disappearing into the expectations of others. At first, this realization feels cruel, like life has exiled you. You look around and wonder why the people you love don't seem to understand you anymore. But as the noise fades, something else emerges, a fragile stillness that has been waiting beneath everything. It doesn't shout, it simply is. You start to sense that this loneliness is not a punishment, it's a passage. The old world built on performance and validation is dissolving, and in the silence that remains, you begin to hear life's true voice for the first time. The awakened do not choose solitude. Solitude chooses them, because only in aloneness can one hear the soundless truth beneath existence. Freedom begins the moment you realize you were never the character, only the awareness behind it. Most people spend their entire lives surrounded yet profoundly alone. We wake up each day and put on the same invisible mask, carefully designed to be acceptable. We smile when expected, laugh when required, and agree even when something inside quietly says no. We call this being social, but it is often just being safe. The world rewards the mask. Society loves those who can play the part, the cheerful worker, the loyal friend, the successful dreamer. And we learn early that honesty can be dangerous, that vulnerability can make people uncomfortable. So we start to hide, not out of malice, but out of fear, fear of losing love, fear of being left out, fear of being seen too clearly. On the surface, we appear connected, thousands of friends online, endless conversations, shared photos, and shared laughter. Yet behind the screens, countless hearts ache in silence. We scroll not to connect, but to forget. We fill every gap with distraction because the quiet between moments feels unbearable. Deep down, most people are exhausted. Exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from constantly performing a version of themselves that others approve of. They keep running, not knowing what they are running from, or that what they truly fear is the stillness waiting inside them. So when awakening begins, when the illusion of the mask starts to crumble, it feels like a kind of death. The roles that once defined you lose meaning. The people who once mirrored your identity no longer reflect the same image back. Suddenly, you stand outside the play, watching the actors continue their lines, and you realize you've mistaken survival for living. We've built a culture that worships noise but forgets presence. A world obsessed with togetherness, yet terrified of intimacy. We crave connection but flee from truth because truth strips away the mask. And few are ready to stand bare beneath the light of awareness. This is where the loneliness begins, not because you have lost the world, but because the world has lost itself. The truth is far gentler and far more unsettling than most people imagine. Loneliness is not the absence of others, it is the absence of illusion. When the veil of unconscious living begins to fall, you realize how much of what we call connection was actually a negotiation between masks. The ego, this fragile construct we mistake, for me is a performer. It was born to protect you, to ensure you belong, to help you navigate the unpredictable theater of life. But somewhere along the way, the actor forgot it was in a play. It began to believe that its role is reality. And so, when awakening arrives and the spotlight fades, the ego panics. Who am I without this character? Without applause, without a script, without a stage. That's when the ache begins, not because life has abandoned you, but because the false self is dying. The loneliness of awakening is the mourning cry of the ego, realizing its own impermanence. The mind mistakes this dissolution for loss, but what's really dying is illusion. The ego doesn't want peace, it wants drama, because drama keeps it alive. It feeds on comparison, on identity, on stories that say, I am this and you are that. Awakening strips those stories away. Suddenly, there is no one left to defend, no argument to win, no future to chase, only silence. And to the ego, silence feels like annihilation. But beneath the silence, something miraculous begins to stir awareness itself. Not the thinking mind, not the personality, but the open, clear presence that has always been watching. The part of you that has seen every joy and sorrow, every success and failure, and remained untouched. When you awaken, you are not becoming someone new. You are remembering what has always been true, that you were never the mask, never the actor, never even the story. You are the space in which all stories appear and disappear. The loneliness you feel then is not separation, it's spaciousness. It's life reclaiming its vastness after years of confinement inside the tiny shell of identity. And while the ego calls it emptiness, the awakened heart begins to recognize it as freedom. Because the mask never imprisoned you, your belief that it was you did. And once you see that clearly, the silence that once frightened you becomes the very place where truth breathes. There was once a woman whose name was known by millions, her smile printed on magazines, her voice echoing through theaters, her life envied by the world. To everyone, she seemed radiant, adored, fulfilled, but every night, when the applause faded and the lights dimmed, she would sit alone in her dressing room, staring at the mirror long after the makeup was gone. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion, the price of success. But as years passed, the emptiness deepened. The woman in the mirror no longer looked like her. The reflection smiled automatically, as if rehearsed, while her eyes whispered a quiet truth. You don't know me. One evening, after another flawless performance, she came home and didn't turn on the lights. The silence of the room felt heavier than usual. She sat by the window, watching the city glow, each window a story, each life humming with motion. Yet she felt none of it belonged to her. She whispered into the dark, who am I when no one is watching? That question marked the beginning of her awakening. In the weeks that followed, she stopped accepting invitations, stopped performing the endless dance of charm. Her friends worried they thought she was depressed. But she wasn't sad. She was shedding each layer of identity actress, daughter, icon fell away like dried petals. And with each loss, she breathed a little deeper. One day, she stood before the mirror again. But this time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw eyes still, clear, unguarded. Behind them, a vast silence that felt alive. She realized she had been living as a reflection for so long that she'd forgotten the one who was looking. In that moment, something in her softened. The loneliness that had haunted her transformed into peace. It wasn't that the world had vanished, it was simply that she no longer needed it to confirm her existence. She didn't become someone new, she just stopped pretending. From then on, she returned to the stage not as a performer but as a presence. The audience still applauded, but she no longer fed on their approval. She no longer feared the silence that followed the final bow. Because now, even in the emptiness of the dressing room, she was home. What happened to her is not unique. It is the quiet story of our age, an age where almost everyone performs. Yet, almost no one feels real. We live in what could be called a collective theater, a world where people curate themselves like art pieces, carefully edited, brightly filtered, endlessly compared. We scroll through masks, compare masks, fall in love with masks. Our sense of self becomes a reflection of reflections, an endless hall of mirrors. In this grand performance, Truth has become rebellion. To speak sincerely, to pause, to admit confusion, these are acts of quiet courage. Now, because in a world that feeds on attention, stillness is the ultimate defiance, and yet the soul longs for that stillness. Deep within every person racing for approval, there is a silent ache, a memory of peace. We sense it when we look at the night sky, or when a song suddenly makes us cry for no reason. For a brief moment, the performance drops, the applause stops, and something real peeks through. Alan Watts once described it perfectly. We are playing hide and seek with ourselves. The universe pretends to be many, just to rediscover itself through each one of us. If this is true, then awakening is simply the moment you stop hiding. But when you stop hiding, the world around you, still asleep in its performance, may not understand. They might call you distant or strange, because you no longer play by the old rules. You no longer chase what everyone else is chasing. You no longer find comfort in noise. Yet, this distance isn't arrogance, it's clarity. You start to see how much of modern life is built on fear of being alone. Every advertisement, every ambition, every promise of success whispers the same message. You are not enough yet. But the awakened begin to hear another voice beneath it, the still one that says, you always were. To awaken is not to destroy the theater, but to see the play for what it is. You don't tear down the set or silence the actors. You simply stop mistaking the story for reality. You can laugh, cry, love, and lose all while knowing it's part of the dance. And once you see the play clearly, you begin to play differently, not to win, but to express, not to be seen, but to be. When truth stops being an idea and becomes your way of seeing, even the stage becomes sacred. There comes a point in the journey when the seeker stops seeking. After the questions, the silence, and the long ache of separation, something inside quietly surrenders. The world no longer needs to be fixed. The self no longer needs to be proven. The loneliness that once felt unbearable begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it is finally understood. You realize now there was never anything wrong with being alone. It was the resistance to aloneness that caused the suffering. You don't need to tear the mask off, just notice it. You don't have to escape the world, just see it clearly. Awareness itself becomes the medicine. The return begins here, not as a sudden enlightenment, but as a gentle remembering. You start to trust the silence you once feared. You breathe slower. You listen more. You stop filling every empty moment with something. In that space, truth begins to speak again. There are simple steps, quiet ones, that bring you back home. Observe your feelings before you react. Don't rush to fix them, just let them be seen. Listen to the voice within, without judgment, not the chatter of the mind, but the subtle whisper underneath. Breathe deeply, and notice the pause between breaths. In that tiny gap, life reveals itself. You realize that peace was never a destination. It was the nature of the awareness that was looking all along, like the ocean, which never fights the waves but allows them to rise and fall. You begin to let life move freely through you. Joy and pain, laughter and loss, all of it belongs. Alan Watts once said, muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. And that is exactly what awakening feels like, a stilling of the inner turbulence. The moment you stop grasping at the next idea of who you should be, the water clears. And what remains is simple, radiant being. You no longer look for meaning in noise. You find it in quiet gestures, sunlight on your skin, the hum of your own breath, the warmth of understanding in a stranger's eyes. The world hasn't changed, but your way of seeing it has. You are the ocean, not the waves. And once you remember that, every movement becomes part of your stillness. Imagine sitting backstage after the play ends. The applause has faded, the lights are dim, and the silence that once frightened you now feels like home. You sit there, still wearing a trace of makeup from the performance, yet completely unmasked. For the first time, you feel no urge to rush anywhere, to prove anything, or to be anyone. You are simply here breathing, aware, alive. In this stillness, truth arrives like a soft echo. The mask was never your enemy. It was your teacher showing you how easily truth hides beneath applause. Every role you played was a doorway to this moment of clarity. Even the loneliness that broke your heart was a form of grace, guiding you back toward the only thing that has ever been real, awareness itself. You realize that awakening is not a grand escape from the world. It is the quiet return to what was always present beneath it. You can still love, laugh, and lose. But now you do so with gentleness because you no longer confuse the play with the player. Freedom begins the moment you realize you were never the character, only the awareness behind it. And when you see that, the entire play becomes beautiful again. The noise, the chaos, the laughter, the silence, all of it shines with the same light. You look out from backstage through the curtain of existence and see the audience, millions of faces still dreaming and still searching. You don't pity them, you love them, because you know now that every one of them is you, just wearing a different mask. And as you take a deep breath, a quiet smile forms, not of pride, but of peace. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because you finally understand you were never separate to begin with. If this message touched something silent inside you, stay not with me, but with yourself. Sit for a while in the quiet after this story ends. Let the stillness breathe through you. You don't have to chase understanding, just listen. The truth doesn't shout, it waits. And if someone you love is still lost inside the dream, share this with them, not to change who they are, but to remind them they can breathe, even beneath the mask. Because in truth, you're not alone. You're simply standing where few dare to stand outside the dream.